Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another great session of our CCPA Summit. We have another amazing guest here. We hope you've been learning a lot, and we're sure going to learn a lot in this session. We have Nick Espinosa. If you follow cybersecurity on social media, you've probably heard of Nick. He's done some amazing TED Talks, Trust Sucks, the 5 Laws of Cybersecurity, to name a few. He runs a radio show, and he does a daily blog videos on LinkedIn and various other social media. And he puts out a lot of great content, and we're really, really honored to have him join us today.
And thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here and be part of your summit. Should be a good time.
So why don't we just start with telling us a little bit about you and what you do and how you've come to do what you do.
Sure, absolutely. I can give you the 90-second spiel about my life that I give my audiences when I'm on stage. I basically got my very first computer when I was 5 years old. And I took it apart piece by piece, screw by screw. And after my dad got done whooping me, I put it back together. And at that point, it was game on. I built my first computer when I was 7. I could program in 12 languages when I was 9. At 12, I started getting certifications. And at 14, I broke into my first major government system. So it was kind of game on at that point. The recruiters started. I founded my first business at 19, and I grew that for about 15 years before being acquired. And in 2015, we spun up Security Fanatics, which is dedicated to cybersecurity, cyber warfare, cyber terrorism, infrastructure, government compliance, that kind of stuff. Like you said, I've done actually 3 TED Talks. I also write for Forbes. I'm on their technology council as well. I write for Smerconish with CNN. I co-authored a book in 2016. I also have a nationally syndicated radio show on like NPR, public radio, and all of that called The Deep Dive. And I have kids at home, so I don't sleep. But that is my my basics, my basic in a nutshell. So yeah, that's the core of it. I've also helped, I sit on the board of the College of Arts and Sciences for Roosevelt University, where I helped spin up an NSA certified cybersecurity program for them. So, you know, me and cybersecurity very much have a love relationship going back quite a ways. So that's me in a nutshell thus far.
Thanks. So the topic we're going to dive into is we're going to talk about trust a lot, different aspects of trust, why trust is waning. So I know you do the weekly episode. Is it Sunday or one day every week where you go over the breaches of the week?
Yep. Every Sunday is breaches of the week, and they tend to get longer and longer as the year goes on, unfortunately, but yes.
So from your perspective, why do we need a regulation like the California Consumer Privacy Act based on what you see?
Yeah, so I think for the same reason that Europe is starting to become very successful with GDPR, even though I think they've got a lot to vet with this, I think it comes down to understanding that we have a very serious problem right now when it comes to how people are how people, specifically corporations, are basically playing fast and loose with the rules. We know that if we are in compliance of something, whether it's HIPAA or PCI or take a more hardcore compliance standard, that a lot of times the way one company is defending a network is not quite the same as the other, even though both are technically compliant. And so what we have by spinning up a regulation, like what we're seeing in California, which I think ultimately is probably going to be quashed due to lobbying, and I think there's going to be one that's run through the U.S. Congress eventually, although my fear is that it's going to be watered down, is that we as consumers, in the same way that we have a Fourth Amendment right here in the United States against search and seizure, we don't necessarily know all the ways we're being data mined. I think most people are starting to wake up to this, and as we see trends, it's not like Facebook is losing users, but they're starting to see the realization of just how far this goes with things like Cambridge Analytica. So as a response to that, and government tends to be reactive to these kinds of things, we're going to see California try to spin this up, possibly other states, possibly the US government. And by virtue of that, it starts to give us, if you will, kind of that, for lack of a better term, constitutional right to ourselves, to our own data, to have a deeper understanding of exactly what you know about me. In the same way that I can go to my doctor under HIPAA compliance here in the United States and say, show me every medical record, every note, everything. That's my right to have that data. So why shouldn't I have that right on a Facebook post that I'm setting the settings for to say just me and my friends? not really realizing it's me, my friends, Mark Zuckerberg, and 20,000 of his employees. So that's what we're seeing here, and that's the problem that I think California is going to be addressing with this, because quite frankly, I think a lot of the world is now just really starting to wake up to this, and we really don't even know how deep this goes. And if you're looking at studies of this, when Edward Snowden released everything that he did in 2014, there have been interviews by people on the street or questionnaires where people are like, oh yeah, isn't that the WikiLeaks guy? Like they didn't necessarily realize everything that he had dropped out, or released to the public, rather, I should say. So yes, I think that is the reason why California, I think, is doing a good job in leading the way, although it's definitely not going to be the end of it. And we're going to actually see if this really gets passed. This really ramps up.
So, sort of along the same lines, with the weekly data breach, I mean, it's all kinds of companies we see every week. I listen to every week's episode just to sort of keep up with it.
Thank you. I'm really glad it's more than just my mother. So,
do you? I guess we might not have hard evidence or facts on this, but do you believe that consumers are starting to realize what's going on, or is it just the IT security people?
So I think it's a trickle-down effect. One of the problems that we have in the technology industry, and actually I have a presentation based on the 5 laws of cybersecurity that goes beyond the TED Talk, that actually talks to IT nerds, to IT staff, because one of the problems that we have in this industry, whether it's cybersecurity, IT, or any form of technology, is actually conveying in plain old English, to the general user that has no idea about this. I think one of our biggest tools and one of our biggest allies here just happens to be the media. We have seen some absolutely spectacular breaches that have been starting to put things on the radar, whether it's the whole thing with the 2016 election, and I won't even get into that, with Equifax, Marriott. I mean, this past week it was DoorDash, which is pretty big. They got 5 million users hit. And I think as we start to see that, as we start to become aware of that, I think the public starts to really wake up and be aware of that in a way that they just weren't before. And I think that's a really good thing. But the problem is that we have just overall in our industry a problem with nerd to English translation. Like nobody knows what the hell a DNS hijack is unless you're in IT or cybersecurity, right? My mother's not going to understand that. But when I tell my mother that her credit card got ripped off or her social security number got ripped off because somebody didn't store it right online, she gets that. And so I think how we are conveying this to the public becomes a huge thing, in our industry. And quite frankly, a lot of us can't deliver in that way. I try to pride myself on what I call nerd to English translation, but I think it's overall, it's, what you don't want is people just giving you a blank stare as you get into technical answers. Right. The information's got to match the level of understanding.
Right.
That's a real good point.
Do you think, seems like over the last few years, breaches have become more obvious. Maybe that's partly because of breach disclosure laws. Do you think those are doing good for the common community?
Yeah, I think so. So one thing that I would advise a client of mine, and there's an entire process for breach remediation, as you well know. So if I get a client that calls me, or a prospective client that says, hey, we need help, we think we've been breached, I mean, the first 2 words out of my mouth are shut up. You haven't been breached, you have an incident.
Right.
We don't know if you've been breached. So there's an entire process and protocol for this. But my advice to every company that works with me is disclose, and is disclose as fast as you possibly can, because your job is to protect your consumer base. Your job is to protect your customer. And if you are looking at an organization that fails spectacularly on that loses consumer confidence, that would be something like Uber. Uber basically got hacked. They paid the hacker off not to disclose the data, and then that came out a year later. We saw a drop in consumer confidence with Uber, which is now picking back up, and they were banking on weathering that storm. But that's a problem, because you're leaving your consumers pretty much twisting in the wind for that year. What identity theft scams, have been wrought, because of not disclosing. And so I think that while we have breach disclosure laws, a lot of times they're not 100%, or a lot of times they leave a lot of stuff open for wiggle room. Look at another recent one is the Click2Gov breach that happened November of 2018. That was part of my breaches of the week. And for about a month, every week I would say, okay, these are the towns, cities, municipalities that were now disclosing this. And I just literally, in my last video yesterday, talked about two different municipalities, one in Iowa and one in Florida, that just disclosed the click to gov. And I'm thinking to myself, that was almost a year ago.
Right.
What took you so long? It's not like you're sitting on this information. You know, you are now, basically the citizens that are using your government services are now at a disadvantage compared to, let's say, one town over. And so we have a very serious issue with that I think runs onto trust, you know, that talks about the confidence and trust. And I've literally been in meetings with corporations, large corporations, where their CISOs, their marketing team, their lawyers, everybody is going through kind of the meeting of, okay, what's the number that we can release to the public that isn't so low that nobody will believe, right? Because Equifax wouldn't believe, you know, nobody believed it was 10 records, right? Versus the number that will put us out of business, like torches and pitchforks at the CEO's door. And so they come up with, in Equifax's case, 142 million, and then they rise it. We're up another, I think, something to 50 to 100 million records. And it's not like they magically found log files or evidence before. No, the bomb drops, they weather the storm, and then they go up and up and up. Yahoo did the same thing. They started
Right.
at 500 million, then a billion, then 1.5, then 2, then 3 billion. Then anything Yahoo's ever looked at in the history of that company is probably infected or breached in some way, shape, or form. And I think that is one of those things that we really need to tighten up when we're talking about compliance law, because that's going to get us into trouble. And so when I'm talking about this, I'm like, look, every man, woman, and child living and dead got affected by Equifax. I don't care what they say. You're affected. And I think that's the message that we need to convey on that.
And sort of, I guess, sort of along the same lines, we see that, I hate to say it, but we see this non-truthfulness among companies when they do have breaches.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the CCPA are attempting to make them come forward.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that? Does that hurt the people's perception of these companies when they do that, when they come out with 150 million, then they slowly increase it? Because I mean, all the people I talk to say they know something's up. Do you think that affects their image after that?
Okay, so in that sense, not really, and I'll tell you why. Because if we're looking at this, the damage has been done on day one. The bomb has dropped. Everybody's pissed. Every news organization is talking about the end of the world, and you know, in terms of data privacy, whether it's Equifax or Marriott or whatever. And at that point, at some point, we realize this is a company that is probably pegged too big to fail, and so it's not going anywhere. And oh darn it, we'll just suck it up and hate them. But you know, every time I've got to go get a mortgage or buy a car, I'm going to have to deal with them. And by virtue of that, they say, great. And then what ends up happening is some other massive breach shows up. And I have actually seen this because as I'm doing breaches of the week, I start to track these things. When the Marriotts and Equifaxes of the world start dropping bombs, that's when all the little breaches go. So if we're sitting on 1 million records that have been out, and we're saying, oh God, when do we disclose? We're praying for an Equifax, you know, because I mean, right? Oh, look at them, look at them, look at them. By the way, us, look at them, look at them. I mean, that's how this works. And so if you're slowly upping it over time, I mean, when I'm talking about the statistics and going through the history of the Yahoo breach alone, it's mind blowing to people. They're like, I had no idea. You know, and so by virtue of that, most people think the Equifax thing is over, and it's not. It'll take years for them to get up there. You know, it's the same with Dropbox. Dropbox declared 7 million, and then about 5 years later, they said, oh yeah, it was actually 70 million. You know, but this is kind of the state of the world, and so most people are not catching that. Oh, it's 10 times more worse than I thought it was, because it happened years ago, and they're like, we've already moved on, and Dropbox has hopefully secured themselves since then. You know, and all of that. So by virtue of that, no, I don't think it's really reputation damaging, because if the large organization can weather the storm ahead of time, you know, it's you know, it works. Now, conversely, I would think that those companies that keep consumer confidence are the ones that are completely forthright, upcoming, and incredibly proactive. You know, and I will give you an example of that, not necessarily in the data breach side, but on the mobile device side, Samsung, for example. Samsung pretty much made a customer for life from me when the Note 7 started getting all explodey on everybody. They were setting on fire. They basically recalled all of them, gave everybody a refund, started sending fireproof boxes, did everything that they possibly could. And they announced the whole thing. They did an entire report with a detailed technical analysis. The first 24 hours of that breach, they lost 22 billion in market cap. That's crazy. But they weathered that storm. And I said, this is the way you handle a problem. You are transparent, you're upfront, and your personal life, if you're perpetually lying to your wife and she eventually finds out, not a good thing. That's what we're talking about here. We enter a trust relationship with an organization, whatever that is. And when they break that trust, if they're more transparent, we're more forgiving, and studies have borne that out. That's why with Uber, they took a reputation hit pretty hardcore, for that. And they're just now recovering from that, which was, I think, just egregious. It really was.
Yeah, I have a question, and I listened to a couple of your answers. I listened to a couple of your answers, and based on this last answer, I have a question, but at the same time, it's almost like a fear. And I just want to kind of get your comments about it, especially when you're in the public and you hear about these breaches over and over. Is there going to be a point where the consumer here gets to a saturation point where it's another breach? Oh, another breach. You know what I mean? And it has no effect or really.
Yeah, we're there. I mean, no, we really are. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. I mean, how many of us have seen the level of breaches and say, you know what, I'm going to go get a one-room shack in Montana and start writing manifestos?
Yeah.
I mean, right? Nobody, virtually nobody, and so what I think the problem that we have is the same problem that we would have with politics. One of the ways to get through a scandal is to inundate you with a whole bunch of other scandals to take your focus off, the main scandal, if you will. That's been political spin, I think, probably since the dawn of time and media existed. So in that sense, yes. I mean, you have this, it's in part, I think, a sense of complacency, but it's also this, well, okay, I just expect it at this point.
Right.
And so then people, I think, maintain this logic that is outside of what I think the core of privacy is, which is, well, I have nothing to hide. So at this point, it's just out there. And I think that's where we start to get into flawed thinking, because it's not about what you have to hide. It's about the concept that you have the ability to do with what you want with your information. Right. And a lot of people don't really understand that. And so when you're inundated with, oh, I was exposed here and here and here and here and here, the New York, I think it was the New York Times or the Washington Post actually had an article, I want to say it was about a year ago or so, that they updated recently, where you could literally go and like check, have you used any of these services? And they can literally tell you, oh, your data's been out there 53 times in the last 4 years, and people are like, well, but that speaks to one side of it. The other side speaks to a lack of proactivity, basically on the public side in the government. I wrote an article for Forbes. I guarantee you 3 people read it. It was probably my worst performing article in Forbes, and it's about our broken identity system. I mean, think about it. You're both American, correct?
Right.
Correct.
Right. So your core identification in America, as is mine, is a social security number, is a number that was created in the 1930s, and we are still using today in the world of hacking, cryptography, and everything else. That's ridiculous that we are at that level. We have a lot of different concepts of what we could do to maintain a better identity system, a more secure identity system, but it has zero traction whatsoever. It's not sexy enough to even read about, not that I have 1 billion followers or something, but I look at my other articles and I'm like, nobody read this thing. And I think it's probably one of the most important issues we have today, because nobody's talking about it at a level that can actually affect change.
Right.
It's a serious issue.
Right. So I guess along those lines, and that's why you have the CCPA or something, and more things coming out because of that very reason, because of that lackadaisical behavior, where as far as data is concerned,
Right. Well, and now the data is being aggregated. Like my radio show for this week, I literally was at the radio station this morning recording and doing all of that. Is we are now creating a social credit system in the same way that the Chinese have. But it's just not being run by the government, And so now you have a whole bunch of pockets of social credit. You got social credit on like Uber or WhatsApp, Airbnb. There's a company called Patreon Scan that bars and restaurants use to basically verify fake IDs. But they also take an image of you and create a profile for you that is shared between all the bars and restaurants that use Patreon Scan. So let's say one bar kicks you out because they think you're a jerk or for whatever reason, you could potentially be banned by all the other bars that use that, all the other restaurants that use that. Now, if you start aggregating that data, when somebody figures out, oh, I can hook into the back end of all of these companies and make a dump truck load of money data mining this as a user set, as identification set, and then the government gets involved and says, well, we want access to that in the same way we have access to Google and Facebook and everything else. And now you've got a de facto social credit system. You know, people don't think about these things. I mean, this is a serious problem that we are dealing with when it comes to privacy. And so how does something like the, you know, California's new law or the GDPR really respond to that?
Right.
You know, there's no real mechanism here to deal with that. And by virtue of that, you know, what's great for California is probably great for the other 49 states. But I'm sitting here in Chicago and Illinois. I don't have that protection. I want that protection. I don't have that protection. You know, and that's one of the things. I mean, that's what we have to deal with.
Another series of episodes you do is when you talk about the companies that are, I guess, not violating our privacy, since we don't have any legal rights, but they're encroaching on it for sure. You talk about the cameras, you talk about that Patreon system, et cetera. Where are we going, and where should we be going with privacy? What should companies actually be doing?
Right. Well, I think, I mean, and allow me to clarify, we do have some rights. The problem that we have is that there's a lot of holes in the technology laws that we have. Most of them are written in the 80s under the Reagan administration. And so we see that, like, okay, well, let's say a phone call on our mobile phone might be protected from, let's say, the police just tapping in, you know, without getting a warrant. They can turn on the GPS without a warrant. They were using a product called Location Smart to do that. So what we need, I think, in that sense is, and I think where this is going and what companies need to do is they need to create a standard that I think is ensuring privacy in a way that a lot of other corporations aren't. What I'm talking about is, I think there is room in this market to basically advertise yourself as more secure than everybody else if you're a large organization, and I think you will get users. You know, the problem is that if you are going up against other massive corporations that already have a foothold in there, like Facebook, for example, there's a slew of smaller social media platforms that can do what Facebook do, and they've got maybe 4 or 5 million users versus the almost 3 billion that Facebook has. You know, so it's a drop in the bucket. But when you're looking at an organization, you know, that just has technology, as you, let's say, walk through their store, that's something that they should be able to advertise and say, you know, we're doing this to keep you safe. We're not saving the data. We don't have any of these things. You know, the perfect example of this, I think, would be Lowe's and Home Depot right now. Simultaneous class action lawsuits just got filed against them because they have cameras in their store and they're applying facial recognition. So every time I walk into Home Depot to buy, I don't know, nails or a hammer or something, I'm automatically being, you know, put in there. Now they say it's for loss prevention. In other words, you know, if I start ripping off that store, then every other store in the area sees me come in, you know, and says, okay, we have to kick this guy out because he's here to steal. But what are they doing with the data? They haven't been transparent. How are they holding this? How are they, you know, retaining this? How long do they retain it for? Who are they selling it to? And so I think there's a real advantage there to open up a Home Depot competitor or, you know, be Lowe's and say, you know, we're not going to do that. We have cameras, we have all of these things, but, you know, this is where we're at. And I think that a lot of companies would be successful simply being transparent with that. You're going to scare people away. You know, there's always going to be people that have the tinfoil hats. Mine's probably bigger than most. You know, I'm not quite like the lizard people that rule the government big, but I'm, you know, I have a pretty thick tinfoil hat on. You know, but even I recognize that it's a balance between just being a functional member of society versus the privacy that I can enforce myself by not installing the apps that are going to data mine me or recognizing that I have rights, you know, even when they're not, you know, clearly posted.
So on your one TED Talk about trust sucks, you talked about, this is my own terms, but people's assumptions of trust. You gave the example of the coffee shop. You go there every day, so you subconsciously begin to trust them. And so as consumers, we subconsciously trust these companies that we're using, be it Gmail, Facebook, whatever the companies we are. what checks should consumers be applying?
Well, I mean, let's start at the beginning as a quick primer. We have two types of trust, and we'll use the coffee shop as an example because I think that's actually somewhat unique compared to like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and the reason being is that we have two types of trust: affective trust and cognitive trust. Now, cognitive trust is our logic, and if we're looking at a coffee shop, we know that we've walked in there 99 times, we've never had a problem, the free Wi-Fi's been there, and so at the 100th time, our logic dictates the wireless is going to be there, it's going to be solid, it's going to work, I'm going to be safe. Our affective trust is that trust we have when we walk in and the place is incredibly familiar. I've been here 99 times. I walk in and everybody's like, Norm, I know the barista. They know what I want. I don't even have to order. And by virtue of that, they have created a safe place that you feel you are free to use. And that's what we are doing. At the end of the day, the only thing a hacker is going to do to you is lie to you, whether it's lying about the infrastructure around you by creating fake one, whether it's lying in a phishing email, whatever that is, all we do, that's it, is we lie. And so when we are talking about this, and this is actually one of the reasons why I created the 5 laws of cybersecurity and it was my second one, is because, okay, here's our foundation of trust for failure. Now we can apply the 5 laws of cybersecurity to that. And I think if consumers just stop for a moment and say, wait a second, we have to create a filter of distrust in the technological environment around us. We can trust our best friends, our spouses, our kids, our, whatever that is, and that's fine, but we don't own the wireless. And we don't necessarily know that the wireless in that coffee shop, who's on it, and it's shared, or how it's secured. There's no standard. Starbucks can have a standard wireless all over, the country or the planet, and that's great. Now I know what I'm getting every time I walk in. Now I also know how to spoof it every time I walk in. But Sally's coffee shop down the corner, that's, Sally from the neighborhood, that's running this thing, she might just go out and buy cheap equipment and throw it up there because everybody offers free Wi-Fi, and now her point of sale system is wide open on top of all of her customers. We've literally seen things like this. And so by virtue of that, I think we have to understand that when we're walking into a technological environment where we're seeing technology that we don't own, we don't control, we haven't configured, or somebody that we trust hasn't configured for us, there's a real possibility that it could get us into trouble. Same with a phishing email. If you belong to a bank and they say, oh, we have a problem with your account, don't trust the email. Why don't you just go to the website directly? It's stuff like that. The cameras that you see in front of you, you don't necessarily know who owns them and what they're doing with them. So do you really want to trust that? Do you really want to attach to a free wireless? And that's what we're talking about. The people that connect to us, as my other example in the Trust Sucks TED Talk was, we can make anybody, seem like anybody else. I can spoof somebody. Let's say I Google you and I find out you went to this college, graduated from this date. I can find you on classmates.com, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, and all of this. I can make myself somebody from your class that isn't on Facebook or that I can see you're connected to, and then connect to you, get into your life, and then start sending you infections. I mean, we've literally infected companies this way through social engineering, and we're 100% successful when we can social engineer. It's the truth, because we as humans trust, even though we shouldn't. We really shouldn't when it comes to technological environments.
And on the flip side of that, we know we have to trust companies to do business with them.
To an extent, though.
Right.
So a lot of people say, well, I trust the government to take my taxes and surveil me. I also trust the government to keep me on the road and to make sure that if my house burns down, there's a fire department, and if we ever get invaded, we have an army, so you can trust, but you can also trust with an understanding of the pitfalls, of the fallacies of
right.
Trust. I trust Home Depot is probably going to have very competitive prices when I go in to buy stuff at Home Depot, whatever I need for my house. That doesn't necessarily mean I have to trust them as a corporation with my information, with my data. And I'm not sitting here telling everybody, oh, go pay cash for everything, but I mean, go ahead, use your debit card, use your credit card and all of that. Just understand right. That's being tracked. Understand that Home Depot says, oh, he uses this every time he walks in, right. And by virtue of that, they can identify me. I mean, there was a right. famous case in Target where this father storms into Target, it's about 5 years ago, saying, why are you sending my teenage daughter pregnancy stuff? Are you trying to, do you think she should be pregnant? And she was buying stuff secretly, on the family credit card or whatever, and she had to disclose to her dad, yeah, I actually am. Target's analytics were that good,
right,
that they started, just their automatic marketing engine didn't say, well, it's a 16-year-old girl. It said, oh, this is a pregnant woman. We're going to send her stuff because she needs to buy stuff. So here's coupons for pregnancy stuff. If we understand that, if we have that understanding, it's not going to stop me from shopping at Target. I just know I'm going to be in an analytics database. Right. So how do I meter that? How do I measure that? What level of scrutiny in my life do I need? And maybe that is all cash, and some people will do that. I don't know, but we can have that relationship and understand that it's not perfect, in the same way that I don't think anybody 100% agrees with any politician that they believe in.
Sort of along the lines of CCPA and the trust issue, and I guess you sort of talked on a little bit, what should companies do to ensure that their customers' trust is right? I know you've talked about transparency, but right, what should they be doing to build that transparency so that their consumers can trust them?
Well, part of it, I think, is safeguarding data, because obviously what's gonna bring consumer confidence to an all-time low is when you have to declare, hey, 50 million users, I'm sorry, your credit cards got hit on our watch. Things like that. So if they are ensuring data security by running best practices, that is something that I think, and this is how I counsel my clients to use that in their marketing. If you are a public-facing corporation and you are investing a huge amount in cybersecurity and data privacy, tell the world that you're doing that. Not what you're doing, not what products, mind you. You don't want to give a roadmap, but level that out. I think one of the places where companies really fall down on, and I've seen this from small to massive, is that they don't have a good understanding of their risk tolerance. And their risk tolerance, let's say on the technical side, could be how many computers can be out, for how long before everybody's screaming, the company's out of business. Where's the pain point? And that pain point in a risk tolerance could be, okay, so marketing's down for a week and oh well, but production can only be down for 3 hours. If you don't have that intimate understanding, how do you build a proper contingency plan, for restoration of data? How do you build, a defendable strategy that ensures that segment that has to stay up is isolated and secured in that way? And then you start throwing the consumer risk tolerance into there. Okay, how do we safeguard the data? What is that transactional process? What does our supply chain look like? Because when we're talking about a lot of these breaches, they're oftentimes getting hit through a smaller third party, like an HVAC right, contractor or something along those lines, that is not going to spend or have the money to spend the zillions of dollars that a major corporation does. And so understanding those risks and then applying a good cyber defense strategy that based off of a cybersecurity framework like NIST or CSA if you're in the cloud, whatever that is going to be, I think, beneficial to the organization in instilling that confidence. But one of the problems that we have is that compliance law is kind of Wild West right now. I've literally walked into companies that are running, firewalls that on paper, have the same threat capability as an enterprise level firewall, and it just doesn't. I do live demonstrations. Here's how I download a 0-day infection right through your firewall. You really need a better one, but on paper, oh boy, you saved a whole bunch of money. You switch to Geico for the firewall. So, it's that kind of thing. And it's something that I think if we are looking at this holistically and we are putting this together as a company, as an organization, that caters to a large public, then we are absolutely talking about that safeguarding and security, that we have layers, we have defense, we have an army of nerds that are white knuckling every day to ensure that, you're completely secure. I think that's part of it. And then part of it is just growing that trust over time.
Right.
It really is. I mean, I guarantee you the safest day to shop at Target, the safest day to shop at Target was the day they announced their data breach. That is where everybody is eyeballs on everything. I was at Target. I think, oh, Target's having a sale now. I'm at Target that day. I bought a TV, like a whole bunch. That was the best day to go. There was no safer time to do that. And then complacency eventually sets in, and and so that's the challenge of this whole thing that I talk about, because you can build all this up, but it's maintaining that vigilance.
Right.
It's continuously lighting that fire under your people.
Right.
It is.
And do you foresee that businesses start publishing that information. Again, not the products they're using, but the strategy that they implement and what they do to safeguard the consumers' data.
If I have anything to say about it, yes. You know, if I'm advising the company, yes. I mean, part of it is the balance between operational secrets to say, you know, we don't want to disclose the brands of firewalls because that opens up, you know, the whole CVE database for that, you know, these kinds of things. But there's a lot of standard methodologies that I think a lot of times in compliance are paid lip service to, you know, and if an organization can really knock it out, really safeguard it, I think that's something that they should be transparent on. Now, beyond the generic, you know, we take your data seriously and you know, we adhere to PCI. Well, I mean, I know people with 3 users in their company that adhere to PCI. That doesn't make them any more secure than you. You know what I mean? So no, you know, this is what we check, you know, per compliance. You know, every month we've got a third-party auditor, you know, running pen tests, doing all of this kind of stuff for compliance. We've got QSAs and all this kind of thing. And I think that if people were really, if corporations, I mean, were really transparent with that from the leadership down, you know, it was really cybersecurity focused, then I think that would be beneficial. One of the big problems that companies have is oftentimes they pigeonhole the CIO or the CISO, you know, underneath the CFO or something like that, and they don't really pay it lip service. You know, they just pay it lip service, you know, or they do the bare minimum. You know, I posted a picture the other day about, you know, the budget before a cybersecurity breach as a guy counting pennies, and the picture after the breach is a guy's got hundreds, you know, and I see that a lot. But fortunately, I think the industry is changing. I've seen a lot more proactivity in the last couple of years of people approaching me, you know, or my organization saying, yeah, like my competitors got breached. I don't want to be that guy.
Right.
You know, let's actually spend some money to ensure that I don't have to go through that. And that's a very good sign. And I think as we continue to see that trend in cybersecurity, you know, and that's supported by the media in the sense that every day we're hearing about the DoorDashes of the world, or, you know, whatever that is. Now we're seeing people really wake up to that reality, especially business owners.
Right.
Slightly different topic, but the last question I have, you gave a talk about zero trust architecture.
Yes.
And so
you guys did your homework, for the record.
Well, I follow you.
I'm impressed. All right. Yes, I did. Love zero trust.
Do you see that as an effective architecture in the future going forward?
Yeah. So I mean, for those that are watching that don't know, zero trust was created by Forrester. I want to say like 2010, 2011, and it's really started to take off. Foundationally, you know, as a cyber defense strategy. So if I'm looking at building, you know, the data security side of cybersecurity, I'm starting at the hardware level. I'm looking at, you know, how do I defend my perimeter? And then within my perimeter, how am I making these micro perimeters that allow me to basically have mitigation for outbreak? You know, and so my clients that are running, you know, the most top line security that we can deploy and execute on, their foundation is zero trust. So we have firewalls within the perimeter. We're segmenting, in some cases, all the way down to the device, so that if traffic is moving through a device, it's immediately checked by UTM. And then we're layering application whitelisting on top of that. So at a most basic level, if a network can talk about Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and somebody tries to talk about Access or Adobe, it's immediately shut down. So it optimizes traffic, and it also lowers the surface area for attack for an outbreak. That tends to be, I think, an excellent foundation with which to build on. You know, and a lot of organizations think, you know, I'm in a perimeter-based network. This is going to take a huge amount of money, and it doesn't have to. It takes time. You know, you start with basic segmentation, basic, you know, investment in, let's say, the more advanced pieces that you need, and then it grows on from there. And on top of that hardware foundation, we're typically layering better software defenses, like obviously like deep learning, antivirus, you know, stuff like that for, you know, self-remediation. But we're also layering in now software-defined perimeter, which is just outclassing VPN left and right. And so we're developing a software-defined perimeter that is ensuring a more advanced identity management system of the user, so that if you've got people either inside or outside of the perimeter, they have got a whole set of criteria that their technology and themselves have to meet. That's actually pretty easy and seamless to do, but it just turns up the defense to 11. And my clients that are running these kinds of systems are the ones that just don't have outbreaks. They're the ones that don't call saying, "Oh my God, like everything's been hit and we owe some jerk $500,000." No, they're the ones that are super secure because they've invested in that. And what a lot of people, I think, fail to understand is that a good cyber defense strategy isn't one that really entangles the end user. You're not supposed to jump through a million hoops. The best cyber defense strategies outside of, let's say, a multi-factor authenticated login, which ideally would go to like a single sign-on beyond the MFA, they don't see it. They're wrapped in the security and needless choices are removed from them. Like how many people have access to a control panel when they don't need it for their job, that kind of thing. So the only time they actually see the strategy is when something goes wrong. You go to a website you shouldn't, you see the strategy. You get an infection or possibly try to open an infection, you see the strategy. And so, yes, I think zero trust networking is the foundation of a new network build. And that's a lot. We are in the process of migrating multiple clients right now from a standard perimeter-based network technology, which is what, like 20, 30 years old at least in TCP IP networking, to now a zero trust platform. With enterprise firewalls, and it's just turning the defense up to 11. Those are the ones that we don't worry about at night. Yeah,
locked down.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It doesn't impede them. They still work. They still get access to what they need.
So we do pen testing for large companies, and then one of our big passions and focuses is small businesses, medium enterprises, 500, 1,000 employees, et cetera, that oftentimes don't have dedicated security, but they need security. And
Right.
We've been working to build out managed security programs for them. And yeah, we've been looking into zero trust, applying the principles as much as is realistic for them. And we've been seeing great results, and we're really excited about it too.
Yeah, no, and it works out well. And especially when you're dealing with organizations that, let's say, have multiple locations, then oftentimes they're more reticent to go to the cloud. And so, I mean, we literally just had one where they had 5 different buildings all connected, through fiber, and they had a single perimeter. And so they're like, oh, well, we're replicating our backups from this building to that building. In case this building burns down, we could just spin up virtually and we're good to go. And I'm like, yeah, well, I can also infect your backups instantly because there's nothing to check the traffic from one building to the other. All of you guys, everybody's sitting behind this massive fiber network that is literally going out on a pair of high availability firewalls. You have an internal perimeter issue. And so, yeah, I mean, there are things that you can do. So, I mean, we start them off with saying, okay, you can still have your data flow like this, but now we're going to put firewalls at every location, and they don't necessarily have to route so much as they have to check the traffic in like a virtual wire or a tap mode. And then we apply UTM to that. And so now we've isolated every building. So one building outbreak can affect another, and then from there we start locking it down. Okay, your building has 3 departments. Let's lock it down by department, and then sub-department, and on and on and on. So it's a process, but I think it works overall. And to the point that you're talking about, small to mid-sized business, I mean, I think, quite frankly, they're the largest targets. If anybody needs the help, it's them. They're in the supply chain. They're usually the ones feeding into the larger organizations. And so they're the targets. And most of them on their website say, we proudly serve these Fortune 100 companies.
Right.
Well, guess where the cash is, and guess who has access to the cash? Game on. And that's something that they don't necessarily get. And when I talk about that on stage, it's like crickets, because they're all processing like, holy, I am literally giving a roadmap to my largest clients. I need it for advertising, but I really need to defend myself now too. And it's I think very telling, but yes, small to mid-sized business, hands down, they're the number one target because typically they're the easiest. Yeah. That's the unfortunate reality too, because an impact for them is way more significant than it would be an impact for Fortune 100 company. They don't have the resources.
That's right. And because they don't have the resources or limited knowledge and so forth. So it makes them an easy target. Yeah.
It's the unfortunate reality of today. But what I'm telling people continuously is hackers go for the weakest link.
Exactly.
It could be a minor example, like in a coffee shop. If I've got 20 people in a coffee shop and 19 of them are just running the default Android, iOS, whatever, and I got one guy with a firewall and a VPN, I'm going to skip that guy. I don't have time to deal with that. I've got you for 3 minutes while you get your coffee, wait, get your coffee and then leave, so, what are we going to do with that? And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is like, I would never tell anybody they're hack proof, but the goal is to layer the defense and mitigate it to a point where you're such a pain in the ass, for a hacker that they're going to say, well, the competitor's easier.
Yeah.
You're not the low hanging fruit.
Yeah, honestly. And that's what it is. We're lazy. I mean, I don't, we are when it comes to this. I'm not going to lie.
Well, last question I have.
All right, please. No worries.
In your opinion, what's the relationship between privacy and cybersecurity, and how do we bring those teams to work together to achieve our common goals?
It's interesting that you would actually bring this up. The article I currently have in the editing process with Forbes is on the changing face of privacy right now. We have a different concept of privacy, I think, than we've ever had, in the world prior to this. A lot of what we, prior to social media, for example, would keep secret to ourselves, is something that is now easily shareable. So even people of, like, let's say the late millennial or Gen X age, that adopted social media, I'm looking at this and I can go through, let's say, a Facebook feed, and I can see, like, medical data being put out there because social media is being used as a personal therapy group, not realizing it's you, your friends, and Mark Zuckerberg, that can read all of these things. And so where I think cybersecurity comes into privacy is a concept, whatever that means to the person. Cybersecurity is the mechanism with which we defend that privacy, at least online. And then obviously there's physical security as well, and there's administrative safeguards. It just depends on the compliance. But cybersecurity basically ensures that when I'm going online, what I want to share or not want to share remains within my control. And that's something that I think a lot of people miss, because I think they're hand in hand. And I really don't think you can have online privacy without cybersecurity anymore. It's just not a concept. Back in the 80s and 90s when, or late 80s, early 90s when the internet was first spinning up, I mean, we'd be able to walk into databases, for governments, because nobody would think about it. Nobody would realize, and we've since matured in that thinking, but privacy is changing for a lot of people. We have an entire generation now that was basically born with a camera in their face and now a camera in their hand. Right. We have problems with addiction to social media and stuff like that, where somebody's self-worth, unfortunately, is how many likes they get, or, how many selfies look good today. And so how do you tell that person stop sharing? How do you tell that person, where their line of privacy is compared to, let's say, mine, which might be a much bigger or wider thing? I could have a cold, and I'm not going to put that on social media because I don't want my insurance company to possibly data mine that and say he gets colds a lot. But that's where we are.
Right.
Right. I mean, the state of New York just proved that. They're allowing insurance companies to go in and actually scrape social media data to validate this. So if I'm like, yes, I live a very safe life, and then I have a social media thing that shows me jumping out of airplanes and wrestling alligators or something, my insurance company can basically say, you are lying to us, and so we can deny you coverage or up your coverage. So this is actually happening, at least the state level, per permission of the government. And so we have to understand that. And so I think that line for privacy, which yours could be different than mine, we have to understand that I think privacy is elastic. And so we have to create a cybersecurity solution. We have to be that mechanism that allows that elasticity to be whatever it is that we are. That's why things like pod, like Inrupt's pod system, that was created by Tim Berners-Lee, who I'm actually actively trying to get on my radio show for an interview on this. He's one of the founders of the internet. And Tim, if you're watching this, please call me back. Your people are going nowhere with me. I say that to say that you have a system now that is a platform that is entirely secure, entirely safe, as far as we know. I will say that, but it gives you the ability to keep what's private, and to share what you want to share, and then to revoke that access instantly to people. And I think that's the next generation of this. That's the next evolution of this, where we didn't, I think, realize, coming from, let's say, the Microsoft and Apple era, where Microsoft was, the evil big brother that would do anything. Well, my God, I mean, that's kindergarten compared to what Google and Facebook are able to data mine off us, because their business model dictates that that's how they make money. And so we're seeing that shift now of what that is and where that's going to go. And I think cybersecurity absolutely is hand in hand. They're married, but it has to be elastic.
Right. That's great. I had one other question, but I think you just answered it in your last answer right there, as far as where we're going and the next generation. What's the next plateau?
Yeah, well, and my hope is that, you know, we're looking at smaller social media platforms that I don't think are necessarily going to go anywhere. Like MeWe, for example, if you've never heard of that, is one of those social media platforms that is based on privacy. You can pay, I think, like $5-10 a month, you know, and to get more space, to get more sharing, but they're secure and they don't data mine. At least that's what they tell us right out of the gate. And I say, at least that's what they tell us. And I think that speaks to the level of trust that we have in social media, even at the cybersecurity level.
Right.
You know, I don't trust anything until I can verify it.
Right.
You know, and that's simply what it is, you know? So yeah, I think we're heading that way. I think we're moving that way. I think there's a lot of people that are looking at this, you know, very dismayed, but quite frankly, the vast majority of the population will never see a video like this. We'll never see an interview like this, a talk like this, you know, my TED Talks or whatever, you know what I mean? And by virtue of that, they're just going to live their lives thinking,
Yeah.
You know, so it's a hearts and minds issue. It's a spreading the word, you know, issue. And I think the biggest asset we have is, unfortunately, we have a data breach almost every week that people are talking about.
Yeah.
You know, that helps as much as those situations suck.
You know, my last question I do have, and along the lines of what you just mentioned, okay, so now we have the CCPA and we have other forms that's coming out. Why did it take us so long getting here?
Because I think, like government, like everything else, is reactionary.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we look at Microsoft when Bill Gates was the evil empire and Satan himself to programmers and all of this, that they were going to data mine us to the nth degree. I mean, we later find out that they really weren't doing that, because they were selling us Windows at $100 a copy, and that's how they were making their money. I think what we have seen is a shift in understanding that the way a Google, a Facebook, a modern company operates is not the traditional sense due to interconnectivity. It makes more sense to data mine you and sell that to advertisers for, like, you know, $1 or $2 a user. That's pretty much what you're worth on average. You know, I think a little more on Facebook. But that is a model that has rapidly expanded and rapidly consumed a lot of cash from advertisers, as well as a lot of data from us. And by virtue of that, I think we are going to start really waking up to this and understanding that, you know, this is something that you know, we didn't see. It smacked everybody in the head. You know, I'm sure when I signed up for Facebook, I was probably like, I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on here, you know, but I can literally, you know, see friends from high school that post the most, like, you know, somebody's watching this, right? Like, what are you doing? You know, and they just don't get it, because we have this concept of trust. It's there, it's our space. We make it what we own, in the same way that, like, I decorate my house the way I decorate. My office is full of nerd stuff. You know, I've made this space my own in the same way that an online space, you make your own. And it's that comfort, it's that trust, same as we have in that coffee shop we've walked into 100 times, that perpetuates this issue. You know, that and the repeated lies by Mark Zuckerberg. And I literally did a half-hour video on why Mark Zuckerberg should be in jail. You can feel free. I think I did that one in April. I'm working on 2.0 already. But it's, you know what I mean? So it's that. I really think it's that. But I think the next evolution of that is the wake up from the doers, the executors in technology, to say, you know what, whoever the next Mark Zuckerberg is, I guarantee you they're not going to make those mistakes.
Right.
And that's going to go one of two ways. They're either going to get better at keeping the data mining secret, or they're actually going to care about the privacy and figure out another model with which to gain money that the world will flock to. Right. The problem that we have now is that, you know, you can use other search engines, but Google is so flippin' complete, you know, and then when you're in your own filter bubble, your own search bubble, your results are tailored to you. Right. You know, and a lot of people say that, especially if, like, let's say you suit up, as an example, you suit up hardcore Democrat or hardcore Republican. I guarantee you, when you're Googling this, you're either going to get CNN or you're going to get Fox News, you know, but you're probably not going to get both, you know, and that's one, I think the ingeniousness of something like a Google but that also tends, I think, to limit our available, ability to really assimilate information from all sides. And so I think the next generation of this, the next iteration of this, is that person that figures out how to tailor results, but does so giving you, let's say, better access to information, and privacy. That would be the ideal.
Well, very, very interesting. Before we go, could you tell the attendees that are interested where they can find more about you if they want to follow you? Or
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you can, if you're on LinkedIn, I think it's /Nick Espinosa. Facebook is Nick A ESP. Twitter is @NickAESP. YouTube, I think, is Nick Espinosa. I didn't have a choice on that one. And those, I think, are the core social media ones that you can follow. I also, my show, The Deep Dive, is, check your local listings. It's nationally syndicated, through NPR, and I'm on stations from coast to coast. But all of my daily videos, daily podcasts and my radio shows end up on SoundCloud, and by virtue of that, iTunes, and I think some other places as well. So you can find me on SoundCloud as well. I think at either /Nick Espinosa or Nick A ESP.
All right, great.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been fun.
All right, thank you.
All right.